Hey, everyone, welcome. This is the weekly briefing. This is the once a week time that we just get to sit back for a minute, think through some of the bigger thought processes, the things that are going on in the industry, questions you might have. I do drive these questions from things I find in community, things I'm seeing on social media, or this one came directly from a client, a meeting I had yesterday. And it was such a great question and a lot of back and forth. I thought this is probably something very relevant to many of us happening. Many things happening to us right now in the industry and relevant to some of the questions we have of, can we own something? Is there passive income? Is there opportunities and so on? So can we charge licensing fees has always been kind of a big question for studios. I can honestly remember early on in the digital age, I was working at Imaginary Forces at the time, and we were doing, some evolutions of the industry were taking place, and we happened to be on the front line in that process. And some of the work that we had was coming to us in unusual ways. A football stadium in Baltimore, we were doing their screen graphics. There was a big office complex that IBM was building all over the world, and we were helping install and design the architecture there, and obviously put screens and animation, the things we were known for. But one of the things that people came to us with was a stock footage house asking us if we could possibly figure out how to repurpose stock footage, basically find more revenue streams for people that made it by making a new piece, a derivative of that stock footage. And I remember that conversation opening up to bigger conversations of work we were already doing and wondering, what can we own with what we're doing? One obvious thing that came out of what we did there was fonts. I think someone beat us to the game of that scratchy font from the 7 title sequence. Someone beat us to it. They made it ahead of time, and they had that issue, even though it was hand drawn from us originally, that the one that was widely accepted came from someone else. But there was work, what was it, like derivatives from the work that we were doing that could be repurposed and licensed. And as we tried to play that out, what's the good? How do we maintain it and grow? We were finding more and more complicated issues with that. So I'm going to happily share some of that with you guys this week. I do have the grid open on my screen, so I can see faces. If you want to participate, feel free to turn on your camera. I can see your hand raised, or when you smile at me, or Matt tipping his glass at me, whatever that is, I can see it. So I'll be using that as my indicator if you want to jump in. Here's the question that was asked to me yesterday. The question about licensing fees yesterday was based off of passive income. The question of, could we make something and charge our client over and over and over again for the usage of it? Such a great question. Again, I remember producing the title sequence for a TV show in the US, probably worldwide too, called Ally McBeal. It was like a David Kelly TV show. And I remember hiring the sound person. His name was Michael. Michael got the audio spot, and we got the graphic spot, and we sold us a package. Well, what I didn't realize when we made that deal was Michael, every time there was a bumper, so between the commercial breaks, a bumper would come on, Michael's soundtrack would be there, our graphics would be there. Michael got paid every time. We got nothing. We got paid one time. I was thinking, this is not working. This is not great. Eric is smiling because he knows, like, that's how you get paid, Tim. This is how you do it in sound. You don't touch that. Of course you get paid that way. So the question was like, why aren't we getting paid to do this? So in the idea of passive revenue in graphics, one of the things that has evolved in our industry is kind of this idea of like, maybe it's too late. In the sound world and photography, they have that ability. Some other fields of ability, there's really like a governing body to that. So ASCAP in music is a governing body that maintains that. That's how artists got paid. That's what radio was about. In the visual medium, the ones that many of us are involved in, the graphic pieces, it was basically what's a Chiron, whatever that stuff is, the like just basic Chiron, sorry. It's Chiron that people are typing stuff into. And it slowly evolved into a different element. And there was no governing piece of what that license might be or how to even track it. How would they be able to track and do that stuff? Especially if you got into something more commercial, like every time a commercial was played, how could you track the graphic piece there? Now, artists, like actors and so as such, have that in place, but there was no basic mechanism to do that. So that's probably one of the first hurdles we have to overcome is like, how would we do it? Who's going to track it? And essentially who's going to govern that to create the report? And if the entity did not pay the artist to do it, who's going to fight that entity? Are you going to do it yourself, maintain all the usage and get it done? Yeah, go ahead, Andrew.
I was just going to say, I've talked internally about this a lot, just about different things in terms of graphics production, commercial production, filming, like, on documentaries, like, do we use the external footage, the stuff that doesn't make the cutting room floor, that kind of thing. And one of the things that has come up is you think about all the things where this is established. Photography, I'm also a photographer. So like, it's crazy. I make more as a photographer shooting for 2 days than I do working for 3 months as a director of something that cost far more. But all the things that you mentioned, music, photography, art, they all have a face. They all have an artist. They all have a singular vision. And that's part of the problem, I think, with some of the things we're talking about, graphics, photography on a piece that has maybe 3 DPs, stuff like that. You don't have the face. And because you don't have the face in the collection of artists, you don't have the union to fight for you. You don't have the collective bargaining of the faces together. So like that's kind of been one of the things that we've run into a lot. And kind of the only places we've really made headway is where we could, I specialize in stuff that does special effects. And because of that, sometimes people come in the door going, I need you. And that's the key. That's the difference. If they come in the door and we're haggling over price, it's just never going to happen. If they come in the door and say, I need this, that's different.
You're totally right. It's like if the access to the person is often where the mechanism, the gateway is, right? So you can imagine a famous, well-known artist, say like a fine artist, a Banksy or something. Banksy probably never do it, but a fine artist making a piece of derivative work, of course, to go after that artist, and it would be really well known where that work was being played and being seen, then that artist could demand that. And our way, really the collective bargaining that we have together is the fact that we compete with one another. And I think our clients know it's that why would I pay you a license? There's a whole marketplace of people who don't require that license fee. So the too late mechanism is something of how did we gather together and how would we get that in a reactive way? Yeah, go ahead, Carolyn.
I was trying to get the AI thing to do the hand thing, but anyway, first of all, I'm so thankful that we are having this conversation because I literally had a friend of mine who owns a post company ask me this exact question today about character licensing. And here's why I know a little bit about it. And here's what I can tell you just as far as characters go. There's a couple ways to slice this. One is, which Tim knows, that I worked with Chris Doe at Blind for 14 years, and I had the Dunkin' Donuts account for 10 full years. Single bid. We defended it 3 times. They did the Running Man. What I can tell you about that situation is that Blind came up with that graphic image, and we basically owned it with the agency. Now, I don't think there was paperwork to that, which these days would probably be necessary. But the reason we were able to keep the account for the 10 years was because we set the graphic look originally, and then we had all of the assets. So there's that. There's a couple other things I want to point out too, though, which is, I'd love to know your opinion also, if you guys are currently creating any characters or any recognizable things, like, because literally a friend of mine created a graphic CG thing for somebody in India, and he's like, oh my God, they're asking us what our charge would be for a 2-year license. What do I tell them? I feel like I should just tell them it's free. And I'm like, no, don't tell them it's free. And here's why. And this is what I told them. And I'd love to know any of your experiences with this. But
yeah, the example I have was like the older example, but the one I remember is the breakthrough was there was a 7-Up campaign, and there was a character, like a stick drawn character of some sort. And originally that was done by the agency who made that character, but that character itself became the known piece. And the artist was able to lock in kind of after the fact, not a work for hire contract. But what happens is the minute that something like that happens and the agency realizes, oh, that we got in trouble after in a reactionary way, it costs too much money. From that point on, the work for hire contract says, hey, by the way, we own the rights to a character that you, when we pay you, we own the rights to that character that you generate.
And
you
the
would have
British
to have
companies,
a character established ahead of time. So imagine like a Pixar character,
right,
that's not going to work because you developed a character ahead of time.
right.
Woody and Buzz are not going to work out that way. But something that the agency has paid you to do as a work for hire, that becomes some of the piece here. And
but the British companies have always had that clause in. And the thing is, like, when you guys see the Charmin Bears, they still have to pay that artist in England for her designs for the bears still.
And I think like
yeah.
one of the famous examples here is Rhythm and Hues with the Coca-Cola Bears, for example.
Yeah,
they did not have that contract. They got the contract year over year, but I don't think they owned the rights to it.
No, they didn't. It ended up going, I worked there at the time. They went to Frame Store with it, but we did do the Nason XB, that was Antonio Banderas, for 7 full years. Again, defending that work. The only reason they stopped doing it was because A, they went out of business, and B, then it went over the counter.
So you have to, in order to make that happen, Carolyn, you have to identify what that asset is that you're giving up. And that's really key here. If you're going to write something down, understand how your assets really work. Because there are greater assets that we can license. We can continue to license with our clients, and often we don't. We're giving away stuff that we don't need to. But in a one-on-one relationship that you have with a Dunkin' Donuts, a campaign, and an agency that can be played out year over year, that's really great. In a one-to-many capacity, like a radio play or a sound play, without a governing body, it becomes very difficult. Again, like RGA, we did the Intel Inside, but Walter Rozoa at Music for Nugan did Dung 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 Dung. He made way more money than than RGA did when they did the Swirl. So there's assets there that you can be part of, but how would they play out? How would you recognize that graphic everywhere it's played out or every time it's used? Do you have another question, Andrew?
Yeah, I was curious because like some of the conversations we've had to do with who's paying for development. Because, like, for instance, our team developed like a whole shadow brand for Uber. It's basically the animation brand they use when they don't want to own it. But they paid for that entire development process, 6 months of development, to create a brand style guide. That's different than if they came in and we did kind of a round robin and showed them looks and kind of passed it off, and then we knew they were going to use it. I feel like we would have been in a better position. I'm wondering, like, if Carolyn has any information about that. Like, I feel like it really depends on what the development of the asset looked like.
Well, here's the thing, and which I was also going to bring up, is that the only time I've successfully, well, no, it's probably not true, but one of the times I've been successfully able to ask the agency, listen, I have to get paid for this pitch, was because I handled Sylvain Chalmet for like 10 years. And I ended up getting him an antidepressant drug, Abilify. And he loved me for that, because it was one of those, like, he doesn't want to do drugs. Oh, it's antidepressant. He's French. Perfect. He'll do it. So, but I got a pitch fee for him even pitching on the account. We got the account. We had it for at least 5 years through 2 different agencies. The kicker was Sylvain made a ton of money, like you guys are saying about the music thing, not just because he did the ads, but because he did all of the illustrations for the doctor to pharma periodical stuff, like all that papery stuff that they had to do, the print work. And so he made a ton of money because of the illustration aspect of it.
But that sounds to me like that still sounds like a work for hire relationship. It sounds to me like, as a business development person, you locked in a relationship that they keep coming back to that one entity over and over again that's successful with them. It's not unlike someone doing like Big Star did Game of Thrones campaign for the entire run of Game of Thrones, because they were successful at doing it. Why wouldn't the client keep on coming back to the place that's at the look and feel? That's, in a way, in that case, what you're owning is the client relationship. It's not the asset itself, and you're not licensing it or getting royalties from it that other people do, like in music and photography, as you guys are saying. There's a royalty piece to play to it.
But Tim, I think Aardman, I've never been their rep, but I just know people who've dealt with them. I'm pretty sure that if you go to Aardman and you're Heinz Ketchup and you ask them to make you a character, I'm 99.9% sure Aardman owns that character and then licenses it out to you. So Andrew, what your advantage would be is if you bring the illustrators, creative directors, whoever those are. And then you have to let the client know that because it's proprietary and you're developing it for them, that they have to pay for that. A, I would try that. And B, what Tim's whole point with this conversation is, which is what I'm going to tell the client who just asked me about the licensing, is try to get the licensing. I mean, if you don't ask, here's the thing, in the situation, the client who's asking me about it, what's interesting is the agency asked them what the cost is. And so they're asking me, oh my God, have you heard about this before? And my answer is, oh, well, yes, absolutely. And then they're asking me, what should they be charging them? Which that part I'm like less certain about. I think I have to figure out like, well, what were they paid before? And then maybe there's some kind of a percentage deal. But I just want to make sure everybody here knows, like I said, you see those Charmin bears, there's an illustrator in London getting paid every single time that you see that.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's one trick is to move to London, right? Make sure you get the price there. But I think that what we're catching on to is that it's part of your ask, right? It has to be part of your presentation, part of the service you provide. If you are a character development company that licenses characters and someone's coming to you with that understanding, you'll get there. You'll be able to get that license. I have an experience where there was an entity out of Nashville that made letters, hand-carved letters. And in this one case, an artist grabbed one of those letters, used it as reference, and it accidentally got pulled into the final production. And this company had called one of my clients and talked about the licensing of that entity. They owned letters, and they specifically knew this was a letter because it was wood carved. They can tell by the grain that it was theirs. And they wanted a licensing fee for the usage of that letter. So it doesn't even have to be a character. It can be an element in the piece. But if it's yours and it's your library and has a known quantity to it or a known value to it, and someone wants to pay you for that, that is your exchange. That's your opportunity. There, like in some cases, that person might come to you, a client might come to you and ask you for a work for hire process. And if you say yes, that's what you have. If you say it needs to be licensed, you better be ready to, one, understand what that license is, ask for it, negotiate it, and also be willing to defend it. Almost all rights that we have to be defensible, right? And if you haven't done the work to defend it, it really doesn't give you much, of a ground to stand on. So our education in this process has to be developed up that way. So that's work for hire. That's even like royalties. We understand how royalties work. Royalties will be very difficult in ad work because of just how the pay. The idea is the agency to sell it to the brand and use it as often as possible. So that machine that's going on there, they're going to want to do a buyout from you, which they can do a buyout, right? Eric, do people do buyouts for your sound all the time, right? They're just saying more.
Yeah, they do. And I just dropped something in the chat just as you were saying that we are seeing more and more work for hire requests being made. We are fortunate that, there is a precedent. People understand that typically that's not the way music works. Although, the more agencies get gobbled up by the big holding companies, the more standard that request is becoming. So what we've tried to do is if they insist on the composition being a work for hire, we will license the recording on a rights basis and retain our royalties on that. But yeah, I mean, it's real tricky. Like the bigger the holding company, it seems like the more egregious the contracts are becoming. So when we do get a work for hire request or a buyout request, if that's a $30,000 piece of music and they want to buy it out, that becomes $100,000 piece of music. Those are numbers, by the way, I'm quoting from 5 years ago. We rarely see numbers like that much anymore.
Do you? Unfortunately, yeah. And it's been more commoditized. The more channels, the harder it is to track. You can imagine like everybody's website, they can broadcast audio nowadays. So you can't track every usage when there was only top 40 radio stations or 3 channels. So much easier to establish some of this.
Yeah. And I will, just to clarify that point about royalties versus whatever else you want to call renewals. So we would typically do like, okay, you're getting a 1-year television and web use on this. The client doesn't have to pay for every airing of it, although we do get royalties through ASCAP, BMI, or CSAC through those airings. If they've assigned a numerator code, we can collect royalties. Those are pennies, whereas a reuse would typically be, original rate plus 10%. But yeah.
So it's interesting. I want you to hear what Eric said, because this is a key takeaway, right? So there's the royalty and then there's the license. And I think that's what I want you guys to learn today, is understanding that you actually do license things out. You're often just doing it on a one-time work for hire basis. And you have chosen not to retain that there, or recognize there's no continual value in what you're giving that client that would be greater than the one-time payment they're giving you. So in a marketplace that you're selling in, the marketplace has the work for hire, license agreement baked into that contract. But I'm going to teach you a trick.
And if it doesn't, I would say, hey, put something in there, character development or whatever it is, 1 year use, all media. And then, that's the easiest way to start that conversation, I think.
My client asked me yesterday, should we sneak it in? Should we just try to sneak it in? And I was like, no, don't sneak it in. You have to say it up front, because you have to defend it, right? So you can put it in there, but if you sneak something in the back and then after you have to catch them and then your lawyer go after them, it doesn't seem to be working. Then if you're going to own the right to something, you should legally have that right up front and as great as possible. You don't want to have that back end come in after the fact and come in and try to defend yourself. But here's something I want you guys to learn, because this is something very important in the motion graphics space. The evolution, our deliverables have been shifted from the final execution to the project files. And in the project files, we're giving away a lot more. We're giving away not just the what, but the how we were able to accomplish it. So in that piece, sometimes we bury our own, say intellectual property into that layout, our timelines, the way we did composites, filters, and so on. We're giving that as part of a deliverable. I have successfully negotiated for my clients with people like Disney and Google that is licensed but owned by the entity. And what I mean by that is this: imagine having a background, a texture, an effect that you've made in your library, and you take that and you put that into that project file to give the client the final look and feel that they want. You should license that library to them only for that project. You don't want them to copy that and then reuse your technique and your visual effect or whatever on other projects that the channel has without paying you. That's where you can easily limit the license of what you delivered, especially if you're going to give them the elements to that specific, and you will win because you have every right to do it. What we do is we say, listen, the fonts, they're Adobe fonts. Go get your own license. The filters, those are filters from these companies. Go get your own license. We're not going to take our license and do that, and you have to license that from them. And in the same element, they'll agree to that. So then the third piece is like, oh yeah, and then there are things from our library in this file that we get to own. And you have to be very clear, things that were made beforehand, made without any specific or other burden of a license in mind. So we're not taking it from another client and passing it on. It's not a derivative of something else. It's a unique piece or unique style or a unique sound effect that you created yourself. And then you can give it to them in the package as part of the flat fee, but you're limiting the use to it. And that is still a license. And you can even tell that client, you can have that license for a set amount of time. They'll often ask for in perpetuity, but certain usage too. So if all of a sudden you're working for an Adobe campaign and they have a collaboration with Coca-Cola, and Coca-Cola, Adobe pays you, but Coca-Cola likes the element you did, Coke can't run off and do their commercial campaigns without your knowledge and licensing there. So that's what's happening nowadays, is these large corporations are doing conglomerating to make other entities, other promotions. And then some of those pieces, the marketing department says, I really love that. How do I get my hands on it? And you want it to come back to you. So be very clear when you deliver, not to negotiate up or to negotiate in that current package, but protect the future of those assets. That's one thing you could absolutely do today in your license. The other really small thing, but very important thing is you can tell that client, you may not have that license until you pay me in full. And what often happens in advertising work is they're basically now running a debt because they took your campaign, they have that on air, and they're going to pay you net 90. And they should know that, like, by the way, you have our stuff out there. and you're using it and you don't have a license for it right now, because it means payment in full before you get the license. And they might be okay with that for a little while, but that is your pullback, your chargeback that you can go get from them and say, take that element off air, take that element out of your commercial campaign, take that element out of the promotions you're doing for your client. If you don't pay us, you need to pay us. So that net 90 terms still might exist, but if they don't pay on time, if it's net 120 or 160, you can start talking about the license use that they're working on that they haven't paid for. Those are two things I know you can actually license today. So some of the answer to my question today is yes, you can license things. You actually are licensing things. You just have to be really clear of what you own and what's baked into that. And are there more opportunities to grow and evolve? We hope so. We know that the world is becoming commoditized in certain areas, but as Carolyn's pointing out, there are certain times in a relationship that you can leverage up, put a character out there, make a unique piece, and they'll come back to you for that usage over and over again. Anyone else have an example of something that they've put out there and know that they have won the negotiation battle of a license? Or let's say lost. Anyone lose one? Eric's like, win and lose, Eric. You got them both, man.
Yeah. Well, this one that we're just in the middle of now, this was a case where the agency had an agreement with their client that all work was work for hire. But we were able to semi-successfully make the argument that, hey, your on-camera actors, you're not buying them out in perpetuity, so shouldn't we retain the same rights? And the compromise that we came to was, okay, you guys, the end client, will own the composition, but our master recording, similarly to the finished video for the commercial, is an asset that has to be licensed, and our renewal terms are the original rate plus 10%. So
yeah,
won a little, lost a little on that one.
By the way, Carolyn, that's the answer to your client's question. It's original rate plus 10%. That's the license. If you want to know, Eric said it 3 times, so now you know how to calculate it. Original rate plus 10%. To me, I think the opportunity that we're also looking for is to put our best foot forward in this. And I know, like, was it last week you talked about pitching and just being somewhat frustrated about pitching, but this is where pitching works, by the way, where you have a character or an idea or a concept. And let's just say this, it has to be recognizable, right? The element that you have has to be something that's worth being sought after. It has to be something that's unique. So the characters that Carolyn's talking about, or aspects like that one letter that the client I had, it was very recognizable. It was very clearly an important value play, and therefore something you could license out. But when you're pitching in the pitch process, that is something that you can put forward, meaning that you are pitching into that with your asset. And some of the arguments that they were talking about last week is to not take a pitch fee in order to not sell out those elements you developed are key. One of the key strategies you might want to consider. So I don't want to contradict anything we talk about. I don't want you guys to process, but there's a lot of this saying of like, it's up to you. Who are you and what are you about? What do you offer? How do you leverage that? And what are the opportunities that you see coming up, and how do you build it? I don't know how a mid-journey character in the future is going to play itself out. But when I see what Erin Sorofsky is doing with her scrims, which is all mid-journey generated, like, she's clearly developing a character and characters that are uniquely hers, and she's using a tool to accomplish that. That's really awesome. And I know she's doing multiple versions. I've seen her different versions of the same character put on LinkedIn. And
who's that?
Her name's Erin Sorofsky, and her things are called the scrims. If you just look at maybe on LinkedIn, just look that up. I should show up a version of this thing. Anyone have a shot of that? It's just really great. Like the work that she has going on. She's basically was experimenting with LinkedIn and wanted to, Midjourney wanted to have a sense of like, how does this really work? And what are opportunities that are out there for a creative person with a new tool? And she has an entire now, I don't know if can I even, I can't do it at the same time. Sorry. But my, I know Zoom is crazy nowadays. But take a look at that. Someone who's experimenting with that, who's put her best foot forward, put the information out there, and is looking and getting some notoriety for some of that work. That's the opportunities we still have in the marketplace. Any other questions you guys have? I know this is like I kind of like found a little. Oh, thank you, Lydia. Yeah, you can see right there in the chat that Lydia just put up there. You can see the version she put there has the stormtroopers from Star Wars. It's very, very cool. But it's an entire character play that she has.
Copyright.
Right.
Oh, here you go.
Yeah. And it's great. She's just having fun with famous personalities. Let's see if there's any more on here. No. But she's having a great time just with personalities, famous people, known characters. I don't think she's doing Muppets necessarily, but at least she's having some fun with some of the opportunities that are being played, to play with some of that character work. Andrew,
so Matt Taylor, I haven't done any of this sort of stuff, and I don't actually understand it. At Mighty Nice, you guys license any of the characters that you develop?
Just about to ask that question this morning. I have to check in on that one. I think, sometimes we definitely get paid to develop it. But some clients, like Dirty Puppet, they do all the stuff for Me Bank. They didn't develop the character, but the bank loves them so much that they just held them across to actually keep doing the work. So the accounts changed through 3 different ad agencies, but they keep coming back saying, well, Dirty Puppet's going to animate the logo. They're the guys. So I guess it is weighing up the costs, the relationship. That there are a few different factors there, rather than just going, I'm going to make $1,000 and piss someone off.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great. So yeah, I'll just go back to the point then. Like, a good question there, Matt, because the thought process of like being sought after for your work and be able to develop characters is the beginning of recognizing maybe you have a value in making those characters, and there's a different opportunity and different negotiation. And if you're having a hard time negotiating, we've clearly learned Carolyn's the right person to do that for you. So there's another answer we have here. It's like Carolyn's fought the battles, and it is a negotiation with these big brands or agencies, clients that you're working with that will want to do that. And it's really truly up to you to make that original work for you. I will warn you, this is not like retirement money. As you're finding out with Eric, it's like, it's nice, there's royalty payments, but those derivatives go down pretty fast. So I'm always surprised. I knew the person that did, I think that he did the CNN campaign, and you can imagine how many times that was played a day. And eventually, it kind of plays itself out to like, yeah, it's a few bucks here and there, but it's not life-changing money in the long run. But it's a smart way of just owning your own assets and controlling them. All right. Well, thanks again for this conversation. I love this format. You guys chiming in, asking the kind of holding each other accountable and building each other up. We really do appreciate the life of the creative career and all the challenges that you have before you. And we exist so that you can thrive in this business life and career. So anything we can do to help you out, let us know. Keep throwing the questions at us, and we'll keep having these weekly briefings and this conversation. If we don't see you otherwise in the community, you guys have a great week, and we'll see you next week in the weekly briefing. Take care.
Thanks for everything, Tim.
Of course, Carolyn. Bye.